Good day, and welcome to the launch of Educate, Don't Indoctrinate, which is a new initiative launched by the Institute of Race Relations. I am Dwayne Iso, I'll be your host today. I am a campaign officer with the Institute, and with me today are three guests. Firstly, the Director of Educate, Don't Indoctrinate, Saragon, and then we have John Endres, who is the CEO-elect of the Institute, and then Caden Lang, who is a researcher with Educate, Don't Indoctrinate. Sarah?
Okay, today we launch a website. And why do we launch a website? We launch a website because of the increasing application of critical race theory in the society. We'll start because it's a bit of a mouth. But basically, it's an academic theory that aims to convince people that in order to overcome racism, you need to embrace anti-racism. This theory dresses itself up as a sort of method for ending racism, but it purports to end racism while in fact it entrenches racism. And what our concern is that schools that instill the theory damage the mental and psychological development of children. It teaches them that racial discrimination and segregation is acceptable because different races have mutually incompatible characteristics, beliefs and values, and that these should not be shared across racial lines. Now, really exposed to aspects of critical race theory, most of us will have seen during the Fees Must Fall campaign on campuses between 2015 and 2017. Our particular concern, however, is the introduction of CRT into schools to indoctrinate children, and whatever age you are, when you're at school, you're still a child, into right or correct think. To indoctrinate a child into what you think politically, and this is a political movement, is beyond the remit of the school. It is for parents to address. It doesn't preclude the school from dealing with the subject, and it should be this serious discipline. But unless it becomes something of a pandemic in a school, schools cannot assume that all children are racist and that it is a much greater problem than it actually is. To this end, we have created a website which we call Educate, Don't Indoctrinate. And it serves as a resource for parents, teachers, and even for school children to explain what CRT actually is. We do it in short form, medium form, and long form. So depending on how much you want to read, it's available in the size of your... We also provide access to current articles, to videos and podcasts on CRT issues and how they're affecting other countries' schooling, particularly America, where CRT came from. And it is with this in mind, of course, the fact that CRT developed within a very distinctive American framework, and South Africa is not America, and the frameworks are completely different. And what we really want to do with the website is to encourage you to contact us by email if you have any concern about the introduction of CRT at your child's school. So both the ability to contact us and the resource to find out more about it is on the website, which is https://EDONTI, short for Educate, Don't Indoctrinate, EDONTI, EDONTI.org. And you're welcome to go on board. The site is up. Thanks, Dwayne.
Thank you, Sarah, for telling us a bit about what EDONTI actually is and what you actually want to achieve with this. John, perhaps now I would like to come to you. I would like you to perhaps explain to the viewers and to myself and to others who might not fully understand what critical race theory is and what it's all about.
Right. So thank you very much for having me on your show and on this launch. Critical race theory is a theory that was originally an academic study in legal studies in the United States. It emerged in the late 1970s, early 1980s, in response to an observation by some academics that despite all the civil rights gains that had been achieved in the 1960s in the United States, they felt that racism was not being overcome, and they wanted to understand why. And they developed a body of theory that was built up over time, that was for a long time relegated really to academia, but then started becoming mainstream over time, and most dramatically so in recent years. And this academic field of study that was a bit arcane, a bit theoretical, has really now begun to impact many people's lives as it is becoming or being adopted into schools and universities, for example. And the reason I think why the Institute of Race Relations does take an interest in this is because many of the tenets of critical race theory are diametrically opposed to the ideas that we hold dear, which are the ideas of liberalism and non-racialism. And so when we see that these theories are making ground, it concerns us because we think that they lead to more polarization and division, rather than a state where people, and speaking of us here in South Africa, South Africans are able to get along with each other no matter what their race is. Critical race theory elevates race above all other characteristics and really makes it impossible for people to interact with each other naturally if they don't happen to be of the same skin color. And that to us is a concerning development, and one that is regrettable, one that we wish to counter. Maybe in order to introduce the idea of critical race theory, I'm going to go straight to the EDONTI website because it has got this really great, very short definition, which says that critical race theory holds that all Black people are victims of a system designed to keep them oppressed, and that all white people act together to maintain that system in order to protect their unearned white privilege. And you can see that this is a very collectivist approach in a way. It really divides society into different camps. It doesn't look at individuals, in terms of their life histories, their life paths, their attitudes, their experiences, the way they choose to live their lives. It says if your skin is black or brown, if you're dark-skinned, then you are automatically a victim, no matter what you can do, what you do in your life, with your life. And if you're light-skinned, it automatically means that you are complicit in upholding the oppression of everybody else. And that is quite a dramatic and also what you call that, a seductive theory, I think, because it is simple to explain, simple to understand. You can look at people, you don't have to find out anything about them really. Just look at their skin color, you will know where they fall on the spectrum. It is a very dangerous idea to introduce into schools because young people haven't had the experience of living for many years, being exposed to many different ideas, and learning that there are millions of different kinds of people, and you do actually need to interact with people on the basis of who they are, not what race they represent. But instead of being presented with this idea, if a white child sits next to a Black child, this automatically means that they are in a victim and oppressor relationship. The white child bears the guilt for that and the blame for that, even if personally they have not done anything wrong. And the Black child sits there as a victim, no matter what efforts they might make to change their situation. Critical race theory is also a theory of everywhere racism. So it says that there's not a single interaction between two people of different skin color that is not tainted and tinged by racism. And once again, in the school setting, this is a terrible thing to do because you're already dividing your school body into opposing camps, and you're making it very difficult for them to interact in a way that is not complicated by these ideas. The idea of systemic racism is one that is foundational and fundamental to critical race theory. It says that even when you think that an interaction between two people is fine, there was no racism at play, you're wrong, because the system is racist, and that means that racism is always present in every interaction. And the implication of that, of course, is that if you want to overcome racism, what you have to do is dismantle the system. It's not enough to teach people to interact with each other on a human-to-human basis and to ignore the color of the skin. But in fact, you do have to dismantle things like capitalism, which upholds racism, was equated to racism even in some of the texts. You have to dismantle a liberal democracy. You have to dismantle Enlightenment values, like, for example, reason and science, which are seen as Western constructs designed to keep the Black man down, so to speak. In terms of theories of knowledge, critical race theory promotes a standpoint epistemology. And what that means is that your personal experience is what really matters, your lived experience. This is what determines reality. And there is no objective reality out there. All science and seemingly objective science is only designed to maintain the systems of oppression. That, I think, is a very brief summary. I hope that has been helpful. It barely scratches the surface of the body of theory and literature that is out there. But we do provide some links on the EDONTI website for further reading. And I think you will be quite surprised and impressed to see what kinds of ideas follow in the slipstream of critical race theory. With that, over to you, Dwayne.
Thanks, John. And I think you are right with your sort of note that it's a very seductive theory and that you can be drawn in quite easily. But I think, as always, the devil lies in the details. And that is why we encourage people to go and have a look about at our website and read up on what this is all about. Caden, I would now like to come to you. And Caden, you are a former teacher, I believe. And since you have that background, what I would like to ask you is sort of how this has affected schools, or if it is affecting schools, how is it doing so?
Yeah, that's quite a big question. I mean, one thing, how's it affected schools? Well, actually, it's so hard to see behind the curtain with this stuff. Schools are often quite secretive about it, which I've kind of discovered in a lot of my encounters with schools. And so it is difficult to actually know what's going on behind the curtain. I mean, I can kind of give you some examples. A teacher will get hold of me and say that a school has banned certain speech acts, for instance, and then I will contact the school to ask them about that, basically, and then they deny it and say that it's not in any of their policies. Yet I have heard from a teacher at the school that is the case, and so it is quite difficult, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very important thing for schools at the moment. I think that schools, I mean, I don't know whether I would go so far as to call it a moral panic, but I find it quite interesting when I phone a school and they don't know what perspective I'm coming from. And then I say that I would like to ask them a few questions about social justice at the school. And very quickly they tell me, oh yeah, okay, so it's very important to us. Our teachers are attending training sessions about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're introducing a social justice curriculum, etc. But then when you go and have a look at what the training might entail, what the teachers are being told, it's behind a paywall. So it's actually quite difficult to see. But unfortunately, I have been contacted by a few parents to point out that things are happening at schools. So for example, white kids being asked to go to the back of the tuck shop line because Black Lives Matter, that sort of thing. And it is very concerning. So I have learned a lot in my engagement with these schools, and maybe we can go into a few of those just now, but I feel like I'm rambling, but just broadly speaking, it definitely is an issue in schools. I mean, critical race theory, critical social justice is certainly there in a lot of policies, and it does seem to be an elite issue, although it's not. And what I mean by that is that it seems to be in a lot of the private schools, but it's actually not exclusively there. I have also come across it in a lot of government schools.
Okay, thanks, Caden. I think the manner in which this is perhaps affecting schools, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, is that what is happening is that kids are, as the website says, being indoctrinated. And what we mean by being indoctrinated is not sort of a propaganda machine, but what is happening is that the way that young people think is slowly being altered. And I think that that's the important thing, that's where the danger lies in critical race theory, and why we believe it shouldn't be sort of taught to kids who are highly impressionable. As John said earlier, they still haven't developed their critical faculties, and they aren't able to interrogate this like all of us on this call are able to do. I would like to now ask, I think I would like to ask you, Sarah, and then you, John, or Caden, can perhaps sort of comment on Sarah's response is, what are the consequences of critical race theory? Because critical race theory, the way we understand it, is a sort of ideology. And we believe it's a political ideology, even though its proponents would argue against that. So what are the sort of real world consequences of critical race theory? How does it play out in the real world? Sarah? Sorry, you just muted.
Sorry, there's one significant consequence, and this is probably the consequence that it appears it's not intended, but actually it's the only result that can be expected, and that is that people of different colors will live separate lives. They will never come into contact with each other once they've been subjected to this, because although it emphasizes Black victimhood, by virtue of that emphasis, it makes it imbues Black people with power, and as long as white people are forever representatives of the victimizer and have to be apologetic and guilty, the natural consequence is people will separate. Instead of learning to understand each other and mix and gain the benefits from similarities and differences, the society will fracture. And it's particularly dangerous in a country like ours, where the Black population is 90%, the white population is less than 10%, unlike America, which has a different proportionality. So it suits the race merchants, the politicians who indulge in it, the celebrities who indulge in it. It makes for very good, aggressive copy, but it's very, very destructive to ordinary relationships. It doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Sarah. John, if I can perhaps now ask you to comment on the sort of race relations aspect of critical race theory and what it does to sort of the race relations, as we all are sort of representatives in a way of the Institute of Race Relations.
Well, I think that there's this good story that does the rounds and people talking about critical race theory, which is the story of a white shop owner seeing a Black customer and a white customer step into the shop at the same time. And now the white shop owner has to decide who to attend to first. And under critical race theory, no matter who he attends to first, he will be racist. So in other words, if he sort of turns to the Black customer and says, sir, how can I help you? And that means that probably he's a bit suspicious about whether this Black person is going to steal things in the shop. He wants to make sure that he's got his eye on him. And that is already quite racist in a way. But if, on the other hand, he says, the Black customer is fine, I'll turn to the white customer first, then he's already diminishing the Black customer by not giving him attention, and turning away from him. And that is, in a way, critical race theory is a machine for producing eggshells, because it imbues all these social interactions that should be uncomplicated with this delicate dynamic of being worried of offending the other person through an act of commission or omission. So it doesn't even matter if you're doing something or not doing something. It's wrong both ways. And you can just imagine how bad that is for race relations, because it means that you cannot interact with a person of another race without an enormous degree of sensitivity. If you're a white person, with the absolute assurance that you're going to get it wrong, and as a Black person, with the feeling that you have been oppressed and that you are a victim no matter what that white person does. You will always be questioning the other person's motives, no matter what sort of actions they take. And you will always be forced to make bad faith interpretations of their actions and their words. And that is not a basis for creating a society in which people are able to cooperate, to work together, to live together, and to jointly produce a society that works well. It creates polarization, it creates division, it draws people apart instead of together. And in a country with a history like South Africa's, that is an absolutely terrible thing to do to society and to the country. That is why this is a really bad theory to bring into our society.
Thank you, John. I think your sort of note of the bad faith that this instills into interactions between human beings is sort of spot on, because I think in order to engage with each other in a sort of constructive manner, you have to assume that the person you are engaging with sort of has good intentions, and you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. And what critical race theory does is it sort of inverts that to sort of make you assume that the person has ill intentions. So what I would like to ask you now, Caden, is those who support CRT says that we who are opposed to it do not want young people to learn about racism and race relations. What do you make of that, and do you think that's true?
Sorry, man, Dwayne, would you mind just repeating the question? I didn't quite understand it.
What I would like to know is that people sort of who are proponents of CRT say that people like us who are opposed to CRT say that we do not want young people to learn about race and race relations, or racism and race relations. What do you make of that? Do you think it's true? And if not, why not?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's true. I think that I think the issues are complicated, and the problem is that CRT is just one way to look at it. But that doesn't mean that opponents of CRT, I mean, don't abhor racism. I mean, take the colorblind view thing, for instance. I mean, I find, and I think that the majority of us probably would like to stick to that ideal of judging a person by their character and not the color of their skin, and I think that that's a perfectly legitimate theory. And I think that CRT, I mean, what they would say about that is it's you're dehumanizing a person when you aren't cognizant of the color of their skin, because that's the most important thing about them. Now, from a liberal perspective, I think that you can engage with that, and you can have an interesting discussion about that. I mean, even in class, you can sort of write the two perspectives up on the board and have a really engaging conversation about it. But the problem is that what you see in a lot of schools and what you hear from critical race theorists is if you oppose their view, then you are supporting racism. And now the problem with that is it just, yeah, I mean, as John was just saying, it just polarizes us completely. I mean, the us versus them thinking, I mean, none of us are immune to that. I mean, I think it's just built into our brains, you know, as like an in-group and out-group way of thinking, and we need to be so aware of it. I mean, I can even feel it happening to me sometimes when I read an anti-discrimination policy and I get upset by what I read, and I can feel my heart beating a bit faster, you know, and I think, oh, who's written this, you know, what on earth? And then I phone and I speak to that person, and then from the outset, I mean, she ends up being a wonderful person who just wants the best for your children, but might just be a bit misguided, you know. So like, I just wish we could have these kind of conversations. But the danger of critical race theory is now you have these young children who are being told that if you oppose critical race theory, then you are admitting your racism, and they will come with a whole bunch of thought-terminating cliches that will prove their point, because if you maybe get a little bit upset by something, then you are being a fragile white person, for instance, or something like that. And yeah, I mean, I just find it quite sad. But Dwayne, I don't think I've answered your question there. But basically, yeah, I just think that there are many different ways to look at this, and there are very complicated issues. And so it upsets me when we are being told that there's only one way to look at it. And imagine a 14-year-old or even like an 8 or 9-year-old being told that, and I just don't think they stand much of a chance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the problem here, is that the people who are faced with this at sort of schools do not have the capacities to deal with it. I would like to now jump to sort of another facet of the sort of whole debate around CRT. The proponents likewise have sort of focused their attention on structural racism, and the response is often that if you do not want kids to learn about CRT, you don't want them to learn about structural racism. And perhaps, Sarah, I can come to you with this. Do you think that they are correct in that if you're opposed to CRT, you are sort of denying that structural racism exists? And also maybe perhaps tell us a little bit about what structural racism is.
Essentially, structural racism is racism that's inherent in an environment, or so let's use schools. That the schools are inherently racist, and that the environment has to be changed, has to be dismantled in order to terminate this sort of this racism that has seeped into the walls. The problem with CRT is that they will claim systemic or structural racism all the time by virtue of an incident or something that someone has done that may be considered racist, but they can almost never prove that racism in 2021 is a systemic problem. It actually exists. It actually informs the structure of an institution. Obviously, if such a thing were to be shown, one does have to tackle it. But one of the things, I mean, we've discussed it, that the sort of the antithetical nature of critical race theory towards proper relationships between people from youth to old age. But you realize you're probably looking at something that is less than kosher, shall I put it that way, when if you ask about, use the term critical race theory, whichever institution you're asking about says, oh, no, it's not critical race theory. It derives from legal justice theory, and no, it's not that at all. And then you discover that the advisors in particular are displaying essentially a racism of such a powerful magnitude that, it is critical race theory, and the intention is to indoctrinate, because essentially the terminology and the origins of critical race theory are Marxist in nature. So if you're going to teach about critical race theory, that's fine, provided you teach about classical liberalism or socialism or fascism. Being taught about these things is one thing. Being taught how to think is crucial. Being taught what to think is very tricky. In the same way that in this day and age, you be very careful about how you deal with the teaching of a religion in a school. Politics is a form of religion in its own way. It's a belief system, and to have teachers determining a belief, and very often the teachers don't actually realize that is what is happening. But as I say, the sign is, as soon as you overreact to a single incident of racism, and I know of one example currently, a kid does something racist. He's 15 years old. I mean, 15-year-old teenage boys, anything is possible. So, you've also got to accept that you're dealing with people who, as John said, their brains are not fully formed. They need to be educated into why something is wrong. Not impossible to do, but don't extrapolate it out to the whole body of kids. You can't assume it unless you see behavior that is as a mass racist. Then you've got to deal with it very, very firmly. But if you treat if you treat isolated incidents as a sign of something greater, you will actually eventually end up in that greater something, and you don't want that.
Thank you, Sarah. I just have 3 questions. I know that we are running out of time that I would like to get to, just because I think that they are worth squeezing in. John, perhaps I would like to come to you after this, and I would like to know what a lot of liberals think that sort of we need to support CRT because it's a progressive sort of a theory and sort of it has the right intentions. And as all sort of dangerous ideas, it has a kernel of truth to it, right? And perhaps what I would like from you is to tell us why, as liberals, we should oppose this.
Yeah, I think it is true. I think many people who, for example, in the schools, promote or introduce ideas related to critical race theory do so for good reasons and out of pure motivation, in the sense that they do want to make things better. They are concerned about the historical effects of racist politics in South Africa, for example, and policies. We have a history of apartheid, we have a history of racism, and obviously you don't want to continue that. You want to get to a post-racial future where people are able to relate to each other and engage with each other without having race looming over them at all times. But the risk is that critical race theory sort of starts off with this well-intentioned approach and these noble ideals, but then brings with it a whole body of thought that really runs counter to all the ideals that successful societies are based on. And those are very much Enlightenment ideals. You do say that you want reason to prevail over might. You want to judge individuals on an individual basis instead of as parts of a collective. You respect other people's opinions and you are willing to hear them even if you disagree with them. And those are all ideals that critical race theory diverges from. And it is, I think, hard to identify the point where it turns from sort of good into quite bad. And identifying that point, I think, is very important for parents, for example. Well, they'll say up to a certain point, we do want non-racialism to to be the outcome of these processes, but we must look very carefully at the methods being used to achieve that. And that is what we're trying to do with the EDONTI website and project, is to educate parents in that dividing line between saying, how do you treat people fairly and come to a place where people are able to relate with each other in a decent way, as opposed to creating these two camps that divide people on the basis of race.
Thank you, John. Caden, I would like to pose the following question to you, and it touches on the aspect of teachers. And we've been speaking about kids, we've been speaking about parents. Obviously, the kids being central here, but I think teachers also have a role to play here, in the sense that they are actually the people who are being charged with teaching this sort of ideology in the classrooms. So I would like to ask you the threat that CRT poses to teachers and sort of the teaching profession more broadly.
Yeah, I think it does pose a threat because I suspect that a lot of teachers don't buy the ideas actually, and I suspect that a lot of them are afraid to actually oppose the issue. And well, I mean, they've got children to feed at home, you know, they don't want to lose their jobs, and the way that CRT is presented, it is the moral way to do it, and so you don't want to be seen as immoral, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think that's why I think a platform like ours is so important, is for teachers to write to us, and then we can help them. You know, I mean, I've chatted to a lot of teachers that are in a bit of a predicament at the moment about this stuff, and then also when I do chat to schools about their the way that they train teachers in critical race theory and critical social justice as a whole, I mean, it is mandatory. So now the problem is you are being asked to kind of delve into your unconscious bias and like these types of things, which I mean, I think is a dangerous thing to start playing with. We're not quite sure about the consequences of all of this, you know. But I mean, can you imagine being a teacher, putting your hand up in the staff room and saying, I actually don't want to go through this training? I mean, I don't think that that's an option for a lot of teachers.
Thank you, Kevin. I think you are right in the fact that there is this sort of fear in the fact that you don't want to seem sort of anti-progressive and sort of anti-diversity, because that's the sort of popular thing nowadays. And not that it's a bad thing, but the way that critical race theory is going about that is sort of completely counterintuitive, I think. Sarah, if I can ask you. Yes.
Sorry, do you mind if I just add one more thing about teachers? Is that it seems social justice issues at schools seem to be driven by only a few teachers. I think, I mean, I have referred to them as activist teachers in the past, but I mean, these teachers would have done a master's degree in, say, critical pedagogy or something like that. And so they are driving the issues. And so what happens often, and I actually wrote down one of the lessons I've learned, which is I must speak to so-and-so because she's the expert. Because what happens is I will phone and I will speak to, say, somebody from the governing body, or like a maths teacher happens to answer the phone, and I'll say, your anti-discrimination policy says this and this. I mean, do you think that's right? And they'll go, no, I don't think it's right, but I think you should speak to so-and-so about it because she's the expert. And then inevitably so-and-so, like I said before, is a lovely lady or man, usually a lady for some reason, but and then they're the ones that know all the jargon and are like really running this agenda, you know. So it's not the majority of teachers believing in this stuff. It's just a few, but they do seem to hold an enormous amount of power regarding matters of social justice, which I think is a little bit dangerous.
Dwayne, can I just make one point, my last point on the function, coming from what Caden's saying, the function of the site is because of the sense of the CRT believers. There's that it's almost messianic, and then so people who oppose it, don't agree with it, often get attacked and are not in a position to defend themselves, or find themselves up against a few very aggressive opponents, and are reluctant to take it on. They don't want to see their children leave the school. They don't want to see their children bullied, which happens if the parents often intervene. And so the site is there to give them the resources to take on the battle, and B is also to assist them to try and progress the matter forward so that it increases the chances of it being resolved or being dealt with, and maybe more than anything, encourage other people to join them, because it's very much the sort of thing that if you have pardon the pun, the critical mass of people opposing something, you are more likely to be successful in achieving the removal of critical race theory from the school. So it's a combination of visual resources and being able to speak to us. We can talk, we can advise, we can hold seminars. I'm about to write a letter for a couple of parents, but we still got to decide the strategy as to how and where it goes. So that's really what the site tries to do. It's a very difficult thing for people to have to take on.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Caden. Sarah, I think you've perfectly now segued into my sort of last question. What I want to know from you is, what can we do to fight CRT in schools? What can parents do? What can the learners do? What can teachers do? What tools do they have at their disposal? And how can we assist them?
Okay. Basically, the site is a good first start, particularly when you're not entirely sure. Particularly when you think that the school's heading in that direction, but you're not sure, because we can give you a whole lot of, particularly videos, which are very instructive and give you a sense of how it's being dealt with in America, both positively and negatively, what you're up against. We can give advice as to how to approach a school, whether if you're on your own or you have a group of people, whether you take the issues to authorities, which is another possibility, because there's some circumstances where you have to question whether CRT is appropriate and should be considered part of the curriculum, given its massive impact politically. So there are a variety of things. The thing often to be aware of is that CRT may be implemented in a school, but not with the agreement of the school governing body or the parents or anyone else. And often the start is to raise it with those people, because very often CRT consultants are brought in because of a moral panic, rather than treating it in the proportion that an act of racism it deserves, and who it's coming from. So we've been in a position to advise on that, but it's a combination of skilling up, just understanding better what the process is, finding like-minded people, and then being prepared to raise it, but try and find the right people to raise it with, who will be supportive in trying to untangle this issue rather than attack you back. There are no guarantees, and it's not always possible, but the more you know, the more likely you are to be able to tackle it.
Indeed. Thank you, Sarah. And I think perhaps it is also important to mention to the people who are watching this that all of this that we're describing here, the sort of seminars, the advice, and the assistance that we provide is free of charge, because the Institute is a non-profit organization. But if you would like to support us, you can do so by donating via the EDONTI website, www.edonti.org, or you can head over to the Institute's website directly. And I think that brings us to the close of this. I would like to thank all three of you, John, Sarah, Caden, for joining me today. And I would like also to thank the viewers who are watching this.